The Prime Minister and both Labour and Conservative parties engaged in civil war. Many fear that the very future of the United Kingdom is now under threat. But above all, it's the bitterness and acrimony on both sides of the debate that's come as a shock, especially as the anger and recrimination show no signs of abating. The country is now split as never before, north versus south, young versus old, the haves versus the have-nots, with tales of divided families and shattered friendships. Well, later on, we're going to be holding a live studio debate asking whether the young have had their future ruined by the older pro-Brexit generation. But first, Sam Kiley reports on the mood of a nation that is well and truly divided.
They've been accused of lies, damn lies, and incompetence.
Sky News is in a position to call this election.
There's been triumph and defeat. Political suicide. A nation left rudderless.
I think the country requires fresh leadership to take it in this direction.
And democracy in crisis. It seems we may be going through a very British revolution, and it was time to get out of the capital to find out what had happened at its heart, to England.
As I'm leaving London behind me and reflecting on how some of the boroughs voted at least 70% to remain inside the European Union, I'm heading towards Great Yarmouth. Now, that was a completely different picture. Some 70+% voted to leave. It can't just be an issue about immigration. Yes, that was one of the major issues of this referendum, but I wonder if there's something deeper at work, something more profound behind why this country now appears to be so deeply divided.
It was once the centre of a huge fish industry and one of the top tourism destinations. But now a quarter of households are among the nation's most deeply deprived. The market has shrunk amid austerity cuts, but a handful of stallholders hang on.
I voted out, yeah.
And why did you vote out?
Well, I voted out on sort of like what I've heard on our industry mainly since we got involved, and that our industry has shrunk and shrunk, you know. So hopefully we may have a chance, you know, of getting a bit of it back.
The Nichols-George family have been running this stall for 70 years. Away from the stall in the quiet of their home, I caught up with two generations of the family.
Hey, how are you? Love your garden.
Shakira is 16, too young to vote.
I would have voted leave personally for my individual case of my family's business. From like what I've heard from them, like that would have benefited us the most, and that would have been a worthy use of a vote. Me, being a teenager, is getting labelled as being racist purely because of my vote, and they didn't understand, not my vote, but what I would have voted for, because they didn't understand my individual case and what I've heard from my family. And getting labelled as racist when you're 16 isn't really like what you'd like to hear, especially from your friends. I'm not racist at all. I mean, like our National Health Service, like that depends on migrants as well. Like without they're like a massive benefit to us with our health services and stuff.
Many fishermen expect a bonanza if the UK regains control of its fisheries from the European Union.
Primarily, Sam, the outcome was fantastic for the fishing industry, but I've lived all through being in Europe. We were in a mess when we went in Europe. We've got a strong economy now, but we're still in a mess, really. So I can't see any benefit of being in Europe where all our piles are going to be whittled away. You can't see in the future, but if there's anything to go by, the past has not been that great in Europe, so let's make a clean break and let's get a new start. And our government can then take that fish back and then fishing licenses back and that will put 38,000 tonne of fish back in our pockets.
So that would make you a richer man?
Well, not so much richer, that'll make the country more profitable and that'll create more jobs for the country. I'll have my little bit, don't worry, Sam, but that's for the good of the country.
Paul is the last fisherman left in Great Yarmouth, a tradition he's passing on to his son. And for the next generation, it seems, things are so bad, they can only get better.
Everyone I know around here voted leave. We've got a town that was once great, but it's had its greatness ripped that heart out of it. People voted leave because there was nothing else to lose. And it's had everything taken out of it. You've had the fishing, you've had the oil, you've had... what else is there? You know, you can only go up from being down.
So why not have some change?
Exactly. You know, you've got to see what, you know, what Pandora's box holds sometimes. You have to open it.
Mind your nose now, Sam.
To these fishermen, today's politicians smell as bad as the rotten fish they use for lobster bait.
Well, the government has lost touch with the people. The vote obviously show that. I mean, I asked on social media, how could a government lose touch with its people so much? The trouble, what most people think, is that the government think Great Britain is inside the M25, where us living out here, we know that Great Britain is outside the M25, and their voices are never heard. That seems as though immigration was a huge issue in this area, because we've got a lot of immigrants working here. I mean, 72% of the people, that's 7 out of 10, voted to be out of Europe. I mean, that speaks volumes for itself. Our children have now got to realise that if they don't do well at school, they're going to be out picking sprouts.
Great Yarmouth seems to me to be a town not that's necessarily on its knees, but has lost a lot of its heart. It was a great port city once. But there are jobs here. They just happen to be mostly being done by immigrants, and that's something that the citizens have to figure out for themselves, I suppose. But above all, it's not an angry place. It voted to leave the European Union because the fishing industry clearly believes it would benefit. But for the others, I think really it's a sense that they're fed up with being ignored.
Leaving the Norfolk Broads for the Lincolnshire Fens, I headed to Boston. It's seen its population explode by nearly 500% in a decade. 13% of the people here are foreigners. Almost all of them are from the EU and mostly work in farming and food processing. 75% of its citizens voted to leave, the highest proportion in Britain.
Carla, you voted leave. Why was that?
I voted leave mostly because of the immigration, and my son works on the land, and I know that his job has totally gone downhill. I can't, you know, I don't mind people coming from other countries working here, but I know in Boston the influx has been so quick, so rapid and so great, all in a short space of time. And I know that my son's job, cutting the cabbages and things in the field, has really gone bad. You know, his wages have totally dropped.
Is there also a sense, do you think, that people voted for leave because they felt that they weren't being listened to about anything?
Totally.
Since
yes,
the banking
I do.
crisis?
I do think that. I do think that. I think it was a chance for the small man to have his say, more or less.
A little bit of a revolution?
Yeah, I do think that. I just think a lot of them, the politicians, are in it for feathering their own nest. You know, Cameron and all those, they don't come down here and see how bad it is, how bad trade is and how ordinary people are struggling. I mean, they moan about people, dole money, what is it, £72 a fortnight or something. They would spend that on one lunch, wouldn't they? They would spend that on one lunch. They don't really see how the common person lives, I don't think. I don't think they're in touch with us. And I think that's another reason why everybody voted them out. We'd have been better with what we knew.
Yeah, but you voted leave.
Exactly, exactly. And I do think we were lied to. You know, you can't ever get the true facts from any of the politicians, any of them. Who's the Labour chap?
Corbyn.
Corbyn. I couldn't even have told you what side he was on. I think, and really, we shouldn't have had a referendum, should we? I really do think we were lied to.
And what about your Polish neighbours and people? Do you think they're feeling nervous and a bit kind of
Not where I
worried?
live. No, I still think they're really nice. And my foreign customers that come, I really like them. I've nothing against them. You can't blame them for bettering themselves. But I just don't think we can do with any more. And we don't integrate. You know, I know they say, oh, we're all integrating, but we're not. They all keep to their own little set of things and we keep to ours.
Crossing this bridge over the Witham River took me into the immigrant-dominated part of town.
For about the last hour, I've been going into European-run supermarkets, European-run cafes, European-run restaurants. In every case, people will talk in sort of whispers to me, but they won't appear on camera because they're afraid. And now what they're afraid of is some kind of unknown backlash, not so much from the English community here, but from some government agency. They don't know where they stand.
The only local European Union citizen who would talk to me has a business helping new immigrants navigate the British bureaucracy that now so alarms them.
Well, many people are afraid, to be honest, very afraid, and they keep asking, Marta, what's going to happen with us? Unfortunately, I'm not able to answer this question because I think nobody knows, even British people, they don't know what's going to happen.
Has it created tensions between people from Eastern Europe and the local people?
I think yes, in some way, yes. I think British people don't understand, you know, that we came here to work, to live, and we don't want to take their jobs. Yeah, we don't want to make them feel alien in their own town.
Now, we're just coming into the outskirts of Cambridge. Now, there has been a direct correlation between the level of people's education and their support for the Remain campaign. So it's no great surprise that this was a place that voted overwhelmingly to Remain. The question I guess I want answered here is, what are they so afraid of in leaving the European Union?
Just over 2/3 of people here have the equivalent of a university degree, and nearly 74% backed Remain. The university reckons it gets 17% of its funding from the EU. East English universities have had £250 million in EU funding in the last 2 years, and that figure's supposed to rise to £1.2 billion by 2020. But it's now in doubt.
If you're in your position and you're facing a situation in which your EU funding might be at risk, are you going to stick around?
This, of course, now brings into question of whether or not my company could actually go for future European funding. So there is a big question mark over whether or not it makes sense to remain in the UK. And I know a lot of companies, not just tech companies, but much larger companies also are now having this discussion, partly related to the fact that their labour force has a large percentage of non-UK nationals. So this freedom of movement of people really has been a major positive benefit for the country and the economy. And just having the uncertainty now of not knowing whether or not we are actually going to leave or if we're going to stay, I think that in itself is highly damaging, and the damage is done.
In Cambridge, we're really lucky. There's a lot of people that are involved in research and science that was a lot funded by the European Union, and a lot of people who really could see the concrete benefits of being in the EU. But to people in a lot of other areas of the country that voted to leave, they just don't see those benefits and they weren't communicated to them. I think it's important that we don't allow that anger to be channeled in the wrong directions or directed at the wrong people.
I think more than anything that needs communication from people who voted both ways to talk about what can best represent our views and how we can come together.
There has been a correlation between areas of high education, a place like this, higher education, and voting to Remain. Does that mean that the other lot are stupid?
I think that this was very much a protest vote, that there are areas of the country where there's, well, in Britain there's huge inequality, and there are areas of the country where there's a lot of poverty, and people don't feel as if they have a voice. And so they used this vote because they knew they could make a difference, and they have made a difference. We currently don't have a Prime Minister, the opposition's in complete tatters, and so they have made a change. So I think that was, I don't think it's really an educational difference. I think it's because of the inequality that we've got in the UK, and that really needs to change.
Well, it's no great surprise that pretty much anybody you meet in Cambridge is going to say that they were a Remain voter. But they also seem to accept that there is another view. And that other view, I think, we're going to now try and explore in Wellingborough, just about under an hour's drive from Cambridge. It's got one of the lowest rates of people with higher education. They voted very strongly to leave.
Sorry, I ain't got no money, I'm not trying to be funny, but I left it all at home today.
These recent school leavers are part of a group being coached on how to land a job. Any job. With little to lose, a leave vote for them was worth the gamble.
What about you, Gary? You voted to leave?
I did, yeah.
And why?
I thought that it would be good for our country, give us a new fresh start away from the EU, other countries, and I just feel like I want to see what would happen if we did leave.
Are you worried by the idea that this is a step into the unknown?
Not really, because obviously, to be fair, it is like sort of an adventure to, like, you know what I mean? So obviously, you don't know what's going to happen in like the next 2 years and all that, so it could go terribly wrong or it could actually go quite well.
So why did you vote leave? Because I think there's been a lot of tension in the country over this.
Because I think we should become our own country again. I don't believe that someone else should make up our rules, and that is what Brussels has been doing.
We're not racist, we just want to become our own independent country, which now we are. It is going to be a hard slog, but we'll get there.
Now the decision has been made, we should pull together because we are dividing more now.
Do you feel that?
The country is dividing more now it's been done, because as I said, there's a lot of hate crime going on at the minute, especially on social media. I am worried that it is going to turn into riots and things like that because of, you know, the younger people are saying that they're blaming all the older people, and it's what's happening. I don't think it's, you know, yes, more younger people did want to stay,
but not that many voted.
Yeah. So how can you say that, oh, all young people wanted to stay when most of the young people didn't vote because they didn't see the point in it?
Do you think that you'll have more opportunities outside of the European Union now? In terms of career and that kind of stuff?
I think it's going to be, there's going to be struggles, like obviously there's going to be struggles, but I think it will open doors as well.
And what about the suggestion too that people who voted leave somehow less intelligent? What would you say to that?
Nobody voted for what they voted for because they were stupid or because they were trying to upset anyone. Everybody thought about it. Everybody voted because they thought that was right. So you can't say someone's stupid because it's not what you agree with.
Back to the capital. But even here, expectations can be subverted. Almost 2/3 voted to remain in this borough of Ealing, where 45% of people are immigrants. But in next door Hillingdon, where 30% of people are also immigrants, the vote went the other way. 56% for leave. These include Puneet Bandal, who is a writer and dress designer.
There would have been an assumption, I think, in the Remain camp, perhaps, that people of Asian descent, of non-white descent, if you like, would naturally sit with the Remain camp. How do you feel when people kind of make that assumption about you?
I mean, I think it's shocking and I think it's appalling to assume that because I voted to leave the European Union that I'm racist. I mean, it wasn't anything to do with race. If we want to increase our numbers here, we should be allowed to decide. If we want to reduce, we should be allowed to decide. It wasn't ever a referendum on race or immigration. It was one of the issues that became a big talking point going forward. It's really dangerous to assume that 50% of the country is racist.
But ultimately for you, it was really this issue of sovereignty that cut right through.
It did. I mean, I think over the years, in the back of my head somewhere, you know, you hear all these stories. The Prime Minister's gone to Brussels to ask for X, Y and Z. He's been told, sorry, you can't have that, you can't have this, you can have a bit of this and a bit of this. And I just used to find it like, you know, why are we asking? We should be able to govern ourselves. It was this whole idea of being able to self-govern.
Were you happy to identify yourself around here as a leaver?
I was hesitant. When, you know, a lovely Polish lady at the school asked me if I'm voting, I found myself withdrawing and not telling her who I'm voting for because I don't want her to think I want her to go back home or she's not welcome here. She's as welcome as everybody else, you know, as she belongs here as much as I do, as much as everybody does.
Do you feel the country's been left somewhat divided now?
I do think it is divided. I definitely think there is that, you know, people do look at each other, are you a Remain or are you a Leave voter? And I think that's quite sad. I mean, it's a democracy. Perhaps if it was going to be such a catastrophe, we shouldn't have been given a referendum, you know, the option to vote.
Do you think that your opportunities for your kids are going to be reduced because they won't be able to work quite so easily in Europe?
I can't believe that people have been saying that, you know, you've ruined the future of my grandchildren. I can't understand that. Maybe we've given them more opportunities. We don't quite know. And I think that now it has happened. I know that a lot of Leave voters are feeling a bit remorseful about their vote and they're a bit scared. Oh, look what we've done to the country. Are we going to be blamed if, you know, the neighbours are losing their jobs, for example? But I think now that it's happened, if everybody was positive, looked at it in a positive light, it might not be a disaster. It might be fantastic. And then everybody will say, well, there we go, we're Great Britain.
Well, if there's one town in this country that's got to be almost synonymous with the Remain campaign, it's got to be the town that's famous, of course, for having the only Green MP in the country, famous as a seaside resort, and famous for its whole metropolitan outlook, and that, of course, is Brighton.
Brighton is young. Its population bulges with 18 to 24-year-olds, and here they look south to Europe. Nearly 70% voted to remain. Peggy Pollock considers Europe her classroom and playground, and like so many here, she's an artist and performer. They've never known a life outside the European Union with all the freedoms to move that come with it. Peggy's world just got smaller.
I didn't expect the result. I was at Glastonbury Festival and woke up to my friend sort of tapping me saying, look at Facebook, we're out, and my heart sank. I left my tent and I had a little walk around the campsite and I was just looking for people to say, like, is this true? Is this true? I need some counselling.
You sound sort of stunned and disorientated by it. Can you understand any of the arguments from the Leave perspective?
I can understand the lies. I can understand the desire to leave based on the lies, but I can't fathom why we'd want to leave the EU for any other reason than lies and this idea of us and them and they are coming to take our jobs. Like, even that I find, no, I don't understand why we've left.
How important is Europe to you?
I've just spent the past 6 months in Barcelona. I was happy to call it my home for the 6 months that I was there. I did little bits of work there. I met some of the most incredible people I've met. I learned more in the 6 months in Barcelona than I possibly did at university in England. I think myself and so many friends around me have so much to learn, so much to gain by just free access into Europe and people from Europe being in England and teaching us their worldly views.
Do you feel that your horizons have been foreshortened?
if the sort of free movement in and out of Europe is restricted, then yeah, of course, I feel really hard. I feel privileged in the first place that we were able to, but I feel hard done by if this is suddenly a privilege that is removed.
Are you angry?
I'm nervous. I feel ill-educated as to what's happening next. I feel that no one can actually tell me what's really happening next. I'm angry at the lies. I'm angry at the sort of the almost reality TV show state of politics that seems to be unveiling before me at the moment. Everyone's nervous. Everyone's kind of got their backs up. Everyone's like...
People are fearful, aren't they?
Yeah, people are fearful. I speak of a generation of people who feel like they've been unheard and that feel that their vote doesn't make a difference. People feel really let down by the political system, and so it's a shame that so many people my age didn't vote. I think it's just a reflection of how many people feel like they have been unheard and how their vote hasn't counted, and perhaps this is an example of, come on guys, this is where it actually might have made a difference.
Back inside the beltway of the M25, Britain's politicians are falling on one another, leaving the nation leaderless.
Travelling across this country from Boston to Brighton, Great Yarmouth to Cambridge to Wellingborough, it's perfectly clear that this is a nation divided. It's divided according to social class, educational attainment, by geography, and between the generations. But I'll tell you where everybody is completely united, and that is in total contempt for the political classes of the age. People here want to throw those rascals out, every last one of them.
Sam Kiley reporting there. Well, coming next, we'll be hearing the views of our live audience from both sides of the referendum divide and across the generations.
And Tim Peake, the first British astronaut to fly on the International Space Station.
Well, welcome back to this special programme, A Nation Divided. One of the most striking features of the referendum was the clear generational divide between those who wanted to leave the European Union and those who wanted to remain. Well, a quick reminder of the numbers shows us that 75% of those aged 18 to 24 were more likely to vote Remain. That rose to 44% among older voters. Among 50 to 64-year-olds, over half voted Leave. And we see that by the time we get to the over 65s, the so-called baby boomers, 61% voted Leave. So to discuss the great Brexit generational divide, I'm joined by a studio audience of all ages. Now, we've talked about nation divided, but of course, for a lot of you, it's been families divided. Let's talk to Denise first of all. Denise, you've got 3 children, and you voted differently. How did those conversations go within the family?
Well, the youngest one, she's just 18, so it was her first vote. So she wasn't sure which way to go. So we said, go and find out the information yourself. I don't want to influence them. The eldest one already knew what route she was going in. And my son, he was a bit on the fence. We left them in the end to make their own. You
didn't try and push them to follow your view?
No, because if it backfires, I'm the one who's going to get it, being their mum. So the eldest one, she was Remain. She stood, you know, all the way. The other 2 voted Leave.
OK. Let's move on to Kevin. Kevin, you too had some discussion within your family, and it was your nieces and nephews, wasn't it, that they voted differently to you. And how did they make you feel about that?
I'm guilty to begin with, because it was a very serious decision that we took, and I kind of put my position, which was I wanted to leave for all sorts of reasons. I came to that decision very late in the day. My family thought otherwise, and my youngest niece, Abigail, she was quite furious with me. Her job depends on our being in Europe, and she's made her views very clear. But I have to accept the decision we've made.
Do you think it'll forgive you?
Well, she forgives me most things, so I expect she'll come around in the end.
Also on the front row, we've got Phil here. Like many families, it's something that's been talked about over the dinner table. You've got your nephew Martin here. You both voted differently. You're obviously still in speaking terms. Did you try and change his mind?
No, not really. No, I don't. I think, you know, we'll have the discussions, and I think as the fallout goes, you know, it will all unfold in whatever way or the other. Where I found the big differences was that I'm based on experience and they're based on textbooks. You know, he's a uni grad, my son's a uni grad who I argued with intensely over this.
But you're a former SAS soldier, they're not going to have that experience.
No, so I've seen a little bit, do you know what I mean? So I'm formulating my opinions on what I've seen and over quite a long period of time. They've been 5 minutes in uni and they're telling me what to do, and I'm like, well, I'll listen to it. You know, they've got a long way to go before they change my opinion on it, to be honest.
So did you try, Martin? You tried to change his mind, or did you just not even go there?
I don't know, you kind of get into it a little bit, don't you? And 5 minutes in, he's telling you you've only been in uni 5 minutes, what are you telling me for? No, I mean, I can see why people have voted. I can see why they voted that way. Phil and Phil's brother, my dad, have both had experience of the UK being a very different place. And that's actually the reason I voted the way I voted. I've grown up in the UK as a very different place to what Phil and my dad would have seen. I went to a school that was multicultural and accepted people from everywhere, and that's kind of what I've grown up in. So my vote was all about keeping Britain that way.
And Connor, you too voted differently to your parents. Did they really listen to your arguments, or were they set in their views beforehand?
Well, it was just my dad who I voted differently to, but we argued quite a bit, but it was friendly arguments. There was actually no tears there.
And I asked all the audience before we started if anybody had ended up in tears. A lot of passion, you said, amongst your families. But Victoria, you said tears in the reaction, in the sense that on social media, that the social media reaction has upset your children to the point of tears.
Especially my daughter. She was invited to come along tonight, but she said she didn't want to because she didn't want the fallout from actually verbalising her wish to leave in public. And it got to the point where she said, I can't watch any more of this. I can't look at social media anymore. And it was distressing. It was distressing me, to be honest with you. And but even more so for her, because she can't fully understand the difference between what it is like to be out of the EU and what it's like to be in the EU. I don't fully understand it, but I could give her my viewpoint from when I was a child, and it was a lot less invasive. So, you know.
OK. So that's the impact it's had, how some families have been divided. Let's look at some of the issues. Immigration was a big issue. Economy, though, was one of the key issues, and a lot of the facts and figures disputed on both sides. Let's bring in James O'Malley. James, why, for you, economically, did it make sense to remain?
I very much believe in trusting the experts and, you know, looking at the debates. I voted Remain because I also believe in the values of the European Union. I think they're good values which we should support. But on the economic side of things, if every expert is saying one thing, then I'm gonna listen to them. I think we should listen to, you know, academics and scientists and everyone who says things are going to be effective because they know what they're talking about. And yeah, I would defend the experts.
Well, experts in a moment. Let's talk to Marielle now. How does your job depend on the EU?
Well, I work for the Erasmus Student Network. So we're an international youth organisation helping international students, and all of our work is made possible through the Erasmus Plus programme. And so we're working on a daily basis to help people from different backgrounds kind of integrate and share experiences. And also we're kind of really pushing for more free movement and for more people to be able to live and study abroad.
OK, well, you mentioned experts. Of course, Michael Gove said he didn't want to hear from experts. We've got one here, Judy, an academic who studied the effects of the EU on education, on women. You're stealing these people's jobs. How do you feel? Your decision has robbed this younger generation of their future jobs.
I don't think I wouldn't call myself an expert. I'm somebody who did research, and quite a long time ago, but did research onto the impact of various sorts of things in the EU. I'm also the child of immigrants, and I grew up in a totally multiracial area. And when I was 16, I went and lived in France for 3 months. So, you know, these things did happen before we were in the EU. But what I did do was learn a lot from researching the EU, and it's not what it's been projected as. It's not this sort of absolutely wonderful opening up of all sorts of opportunities. It's not all peace and love. I'm not trying to put it in a negative way, but you have a situation in which markets are locked in various ways, some of which work for us, some of which work against us. And research projects, the EU has a way of trying to pick winners and wastes a lot of money that way, so it's much more complex.
OK, let's get some reaction from the other side. Fred, on the back row, you work in finance. What's your reaction to that?
Well, yeah, I mean, before the show, you called me a financial guru, which is generous by any stretch of the imagination. But I think something we could probably all agree on is the referendum has caused uncertainty. Uncertainty in terms of when we're even going to invoke Article 50, uncertainty over our future relationship with the EU. This is obviously going to have a negative impact on markets. Markets react badly to uncertainty. The UK is actually a really strong financial powerhouse for two main reasons, namely our domestic regulators, the FCA, forward-thinking, progressive. Secondly, is down to the fact that a corporation can incorporate themselves in the UK, trade under FCA regulation, and offer services across Europe largely without restriction. We've put in jeopardy one of the two main advantages, and this is absolutely going to have an effect on inward investment on the UK in the next 5 to 10 years, and obviously the knock-on effects, lower GDP, stagnation of wages, and so on. OK, well, we have pitted young against old to some extent, but we have got representatives on both sides and of all ages on both sides. Christopher Smith, you're an architect, you run a business. Why did you vote to remain?
I was really looking at the effect on Cornwall. It's interesting we've got two people from Cornwall here. And especially interesting about Yarmouth because there's very similar problems. I think the whole thing about that documentary we just saw was it was showing a failure of government policy in this country, not a failure of the EU. So we've had a referendum on a failure of us to actually bring the poor areas of the country up. Now, in Cornwall, we've had nearly £2 billion directly and indirectly in aid for just 500,000 people. We've got a world-class university now. It's 93rd in the world. My business more than doubled in employment on trickle-down. a community centre I'm involved with. I managed to get 400,000 from Europe to build it to address social problems. Farming subsidies in Cornwall are difficult, and we talk about fishing, and yes, that is an issue, but equally, without the EU, the farmers in Cornwall would be in real trouble. So
that's the positive economic case of the EU, which a lot of critics said that the government didn't really make during the referendum. Louis, let's just talk to you. You voted the opposite. Why do you think, in terms of jobs and the economy, it's not the right thing for the youngsters in the UK?
Well, I think if you look across Europe, you see the European project, more so the euro, and even though we're not a part of that, it's still be failing students across the continent. And in the UK at the moment, graduate prospects are at one of the lowest levels they've ever been, and it doesn't seem like being a member of the European Union is changing that. We're tied to an economic bloc that, even though it's the most integrated and should be, a powerhouse for innovation, it's got the lowest growth of any continent compared to continents that have got walls up between every country.
OK. Thanks for that, Louis. Well, that's the economy. What about immigration? It is very much the elephant in the room. A lot of people thought it was central to the whole of the referendum debate. Let's bring in Ben Judah. Ben, before the referendum, you travelled the length and breadth of the country, a little bit like Sam. For you, what was this referendum about?
I was told time and time again by the people I met in Middle England and in the Midlands that they were voting this way because England's not England anymore, because they wanted to stop the immigrants. And I pressed them and I went, what do you mean by immigrants? What do you mean by migration? And as I think we probably all know, the word immigrants is used in everyday English as a euphemism for people who are non-white British. And I felt a very strong rejection of ethnic change.
Well, let's bring somebody from the other side of a different colour. Let's bring in Achuko, sitting at the back there, Achuko. You were concerned about security, about immigration, but it was about security, not about race.
Yes, please. I do believe that the UK has lost our ability to control the inflow and outflow of immigrations, mainly due to the regulations outside the UK elected officials. I certainly believe that as a nation, we should have control over our borders, and EU has not been very, very successful in doing that. I believe as a nation, we should have that control of who we let in and who goes out and who we choose to take out of our country for economic
Thank you, Denise is nodding on the front row. What do you see as being the issues in terms of immigration, in terms of how it's affected your life and the life of those around you?
Well, it's just, I think the country is at breaking point. You can't get an appointment to see your GP. You have to wait weeks and weeks. You go into a hospital. I know, you've got lots of different people working there, but you just can't get appointments. The schools are at breaking point. And I know you can say, well, the government hasn't, invested, but at the end of the day, we just haven't got any more room.
Kevin, this was something that you echo as well, isn't it? That you too feel that things like GP appointments are an issue.
I do. I'm personally lucky. I've got a good GP and a good relationship. But where I live, people tell me now 10 days sometimes. You ring the receptions for an appointment and you're now asked to predict 10 days in advance how you will feel. And I do think it's got to breaking point. That's definitely got to breaking point.
OK. Well, let's bring Shingi down here in the front row on this side. I mean, you've heard these concerns. This is the reality for a lot of people in the UK. One of the criticisms of a lot of the people who voted to remain is that they're living in a London bubble. I mean, do you see that? Do you see that possibly your experience of how reality of life in the UK is very different from some others?
I'll hold my hands up and say I've only ever lived in London, apart from my 2 years studying at university. But I also feel like the idea of a London bubble is something the government should have addressed whilst they were pitching the idea of potentially leaving the downsides of potentially leaving the EU. That's my main issue. The way I obviously voted to remain, but the way the Remain campaign was pitched was very much scare tactics, and it wasn't a way that young people could engage with politics.
And James, very briefly behind you, we saw on the documentary talking about the government not acknowledging life outside the M25. You're involved in the London independence campaign, aren't you? Aren't you part of the problem?
Well, I accidentally started the London independence petition as a bit of a joke. It's sort of got out of control since then. But no, I think, you know, people out in the rest of the country, you know, they do have completely legitimate grievances, but London does have very different politics for some very complicated reasons. I don't think I'm part of the problem. You know, I know the metropolitan elite is obviously the phrase people level at these things. I'm from working class backgrounds. I'm from Leicester originally. I'm not part of this elite, I don't think. But I think people in London do have a very different experience to the rest of the country, and maybe we need to change our politics to reflect that.
OK, let's bring in Ismailia on the Leave side. Ismaila, did you consider when you were voting to leave that it could possibly increase racial tensions? We've seen that there has been an increase anecdotally, and we have seen a lot of graffiti and things like that. We've seen videos of people being racially abused on tubes in Manchester. Was this something that was in your mind when you were putting your cross, or did that never cross your mind?
I mean, I actually based my decision based on what I heard from the leaders, the Leave campaign leaders. That's where I actually gathered my decision, because we don't actually have the opportunity of being in the forefront, but we base our decision based on what we hear from the leaders, and that is why I actually come up with my decision. I mean, we are at a point where our NHS is struggling financially. We're at a point where people are struggling to make ends meet. And I thought about it. How can we actually go forward in this? But the only option that I came up with was for us to leave the EU, to take absolute control of our country. Because we are a great country, we are a great nation, and I believe we can make decisions by ourselves. And also, we are at a point where people are committing crime, I mean, we can't easily deport them without the process making decision for us. I mean, those are things that actually help me making my decision, because...
We've got Tessa behind you, desperate to put her hand up. We'll come to you in a second, Tessa. But I also wanted to ask all of you, Leavers, we saw Shakira in the documentary talking about how she feels she's being labelled a racist. Is that something that you felt, the reaction to your vote? Yeah. Have you been labelled racist? Do you feel racist?
No.
Especially coming from social media, from people you might know in other countries, you know, who've gone to live in America or something. The things that are coming through there, it's absolutely ridiculous, you know. Don't go out on the streets in London, and it's really bad.
Let's bring Tessa, because I know you wanted to come in there, Tessa.
Well, I think the main point here is that just because people voted to leave, to have control over immigration policy, economic policy, or whatever other policy, doesn't make you a racist. It makes you want democratic control. And what I say we all have in common, whichever way we all voted, is that we all came together as a country, a huge number, unprecedented number of people, to vote. And now what we have is a democracy, and we need to honour that vote and trigger Article 50. And I would say to everyone to support that, because that is about supporting democracy.
Right. Let's get a response from the other side. We've got some people very keen. Ben, you got your hand up first.
It is categorically not true that immigration is why the NHS is struggling. The NHS is struggling because of austerity, because of cuts, because of underfunding, because of the Conservative Party's policies squeezing it. It is not the fault of immigrants. And I want to say thank you to the immigrants working in our NHS. I want to say thank you to the immigrants working in our NHS who saved my father's life.
Responses from the other side. Tom, you're in the middle, from Spiked Online magazine.
Yes, exactly. We advocate the Leave vote in the name of democracy, of popular sovereignty, and I think we're in danger of fetishising immigration too much in the discussion. Of course, it was a big issue, but it was a big issue because it was a democratic issue that people didn't have control over. And the thing I would say is that the thing that's great about democracy is on referendum day, on any ballot, all of our votes count for the same. That's why it irks me a little bit that we're always tempted to kind of paint this as a generational gap. But what I would say to any young people who did vote Remain, why you should get behind Brexit is exactly the point that Tessa made, that this is an opportunity to really carve out a democracy again, to put these issues back on the table. The thing about the EU and the thing about our political elite who are so fond of it is they don't trust us to make those decisions. If we could be optimistic about this, if we could see this as an opportunity to make our minds up about all these issues that we're discussing, this is a huge opportunity. We should seize it.
OK, let's briefly talk about some of the things people think might come from the vote. Pressure, as we talked about, on the NHS, also housing and infrastructure. Ben, just behind you there. Ben, you've got a young family. You're still living at home with your parents because you can't afford to get on the housing ladder. You think that your vote to leave might help you get on the housing ladder?
Well, I'm hoping that house prices will start to go down or at least stagnate and allow the rest of us with our wages to actually catch up. I know we can't, for example, get on local housing because there isn't any local housing. And the problem that we have at the moment is the way the point system works is that two people from Romania or Poland or wherever can come in with their children and they would be higher up the housing register than what me and my partner.
But the fact of that are that 9% of social housing goes to people who are non-EU, non-UK born. 91% of social housing does go to UK born people. So that is the perception, but the reality...
It depends which way you look at it. So are you a half, glass half empty or glass half full?
OK, let's bring in somebody who's also concerned about housing on the other side. That's Jake. Jake, you've recently been made redundant. You bought a house. You're worried about what's going to happen now.
I mean, I'm just in a very difficult position at the moment because my industry, how I work, is in the creative services industry, and that's one of the first industries to go in a recession. I've had to get together with 4 members of my family to buy a house. So it's taken everything that we've put in for the last 2 years. And voting for uncertainty, it's such a selfish thing, but I've got no idea what's going to happen now. No idea.
Well, we've been talking about the nation being divided in terms of London and out in the shires, along age lines as well, of course, we've been talking. But it's also north and south. It is rural and metropolitan, affluent and working class. Let's talk to Olivia on the front row here. You're from Bolton originally. You're now down in London. You work for a French-owned company, so you're worried about your job future.
In the creative services as well.
Did you appreciate the divisions within the country before this vote came along?
I did. I think... the comments kind of where we're talking about social media, a lot of my friends do live in London. When you kind of out on the streets in London, Remain was very heavily broadcast, so I can see why people thought it was a bit of a shock when the results came in. But I do have family in Bolton. My sister was up in Durham at university, so kind of in that area. I've got family in Yorkshire. So, yeah, I don't think it was a surprise. I do understand, but in kind of a family arena, my parents were more on the fence. And in the end, my parents decided to vote Remain because of the opportunities it would give me and my sister, not because of what it would do for them. Also, someone who's become aware of the polarisation is Steve, on the back row here, on Leave's side. You're a police officer, and you're concerned about how it's polarised the nation.
I'm actually concerned of how we're framing this. And there's some infrastructure issues, which the gentleman across there mentioned earlier, which I totally agree with, which are being blamed on immigration, refugees, when it's not, when it's a simple fact that it's the infrastructure that's been worn down over a number of years. And it's quite easy to pin your hat on it being a cause of immigration. You can't get into your doctors. We need more doctors then. If you can't get in to see your NHS, we need more infrastructure in relation to that. And if we get the message wrong, and if the leaders from now on get the message wrong about what we are actually going to do and when we're going to do it, we will polarise the communities.
Well, they're nodding on the other side, Steve, so you've done a great job. It brings me on to my next point. How can we all kiss and make up? How can the UK now get together?
We need a plan.
Yeah, I think we've been dealt something. What we've got to do, there's been a lot of scaremongering on both sides. And at the end of the day, there was those people on one side that would always gone one way, those people on the other side that would always gone the other way, and those people in the middle were swayed by whatever campaigning that they decided to be swayed by, OK? But the fact is, we've now got something that we've got to deal with. So we might as well stop, get the teddies back in the cot, OK, and just get on with it, do you know what I mean? Because it ain't going away, and all the whinging and bumping of gums and all the rest of it, just get on with what you've been given. Do you know what I mean?
We've got a lot of hands on the other side, but I'm going to come to Kenny because we're running out of time. Kenny, you've been involved in campaigns to get more young people voting, and Do you think this is one of the positives, at least, that we're talking about it, we're discussing it, and more young people are out voting?
Of course, obviously, the referendum has got much more people engaged. Society's talking about politics now, as if it's normal. I guess what the e-referendum and the result definitely shows is that political education is definitely needed in schools across the UK, in terms of people should be learning about politics. The problem was that there was a lot of lies, a lot of misconceptions that were fed to a lot of us, and hence the reason why we voted for Remain or Leave, and that needs to change. And also, I think the problem is that we need to stamp out this racism and xenophobia that's going on in society.
Okay. Not on both sides, I'm afraid. We're out of time. Great to end on a round of applause. Thank you very much. Thank you for joining us, all of you in the studio. Thank you for joining us at home and for sending in your comments. Keep the debate going. Keep it clean, keep it nice on social media with the hashtag Divided Nation. Thank you.
She's got the zap. Boris Johnson backs Andrea Leadsom for Tory leader.
Mission accomplished. Nigel Farage bows out from UKIP and insists this time it's for keeps.
During the referendum campaign, I said, I want my country back. And what I'm saying today is I want my life back. And it begins right now. Thank you.
I have a huge responsibility. I'm carrying out that responsibility, and I'm carrying on with that responsibility.
A last throw of the dice, the attempt to force Jeremy Corbyn to quit as he appeals directly to Labour members. Also tonight, why the murder of teenager Alice Gross could change criminal tracking across Europe. Juno at Jupiter, the space probe arriving at the giant planet tonight. Chris Evans quits Top Gear, saying standing aside will help the cause. And we'll take a look at tomorrow's front pages. That's in the press preview at 10:30. Good evening. 5 days ago, he was favourite to be the next Tory leader. Tonight, Boris Johnson threw his weight behind a relative unknown. The former London mayor said Andrea Leadsom, a junior minister who's never been in the cabinet, had the zap, drive and determination to run the country. As one star of the Brexit campaign rises, another left the political scene. Nigel Farage resigning as UKIP leader, saying he couldn't possibly achieve any more. Sky's political editor Faisal Islam reports.
The dark horse in this race suddenly looks a much stronger bet. Andrea Leadsom was just a few days ago pondering a job offer from Boris Johnson, her Vote Leave debating partner. Now she has his endorsement for number 10. Mr Johnson said Andrea Leadsom offers the zap, the drive and the determination essential for the next leader of this country. She has specialised in the EU question and successfully campaigned for Leave. Above all, she possesses the qualities needed to bring together Leavers and Remainers in the weeks and months ahead. I will be voting for Andrea Leadsom tomorrow. Energy Minister Andrea Leadsom launched her push for number 10 earlier, surrounded